Assalamualaikum. So today in this video, me and my teammates will explain about manufacturing process and technology to fabricate plastic garbage bag. But before we start our presentation, we would like to introduce ourselves. My name is Naharina Mitadnan.
My name is Alia Maisara binti Nordin.
My name is Iman Christina binti Abdul Razak.
And my name is Nur Amalia binti Zahid.
So without further ado, I will continue with the introduction. So for the introduction, the average plastic bag weighs about 5 grams and can support 17 pounds. Although plastic bags can take thousands of years to degrade if disposed of incorrectly, they have their environmental benefits as well. They create 80% less waste than paper bags, only half of the greenhouse gases, and require about 4% of the water use of paper bags. The process used to manufacture plastic garbage bags is called blown film extrusion. The blown film process is used to produce a wide variety of products, ranging from simple monolayer films for bags to very complex multi-layer structures used in food packaging. So I will pass the next slide to Ala Maisara.
Thank you, Karina. Next is I'm going to explain a bit on the flow process to manufacture this product. The first step is melting process. The polymer must first be melted in an extruder. Polymer resin is put into a hopper in the form of beads and screw fed into a heated barrel. The polymer is transported down the barrel by the screw. To melt the polymer, the beads are gradually heated. The heat profile is crucial in extrusion because overheating the polymer might cause it to deteriorate thermally. Next, step 2 is extrude and eject. The molten material is extruded through a basic circle die when it reaches the barrel's end. Blown film extrusion varies from other extrusion methods at this point. The molten polymer enters the die head and air is pumped through a hole in the middle of the die to radially inflate the polymer into a thin tube with diameter several times of the extruded diameter. Step 3 is cooling process. The hot tube film is then cooled, typically with high-speed air, and drawn upwards by nip rollers. This vertical tube may extend several stories into the air on most medium to large size film lines. As the film cools, crystallization occurs at the frost line. Step 4 is cooling process. When the tube reaches the nip rollers at the end of the line, it is cool enough to flatten and is referred to as lay flat or collapsed tubing. The film is then transported downstream by rollers for further processing such as slitting, printing, venting, and back conversion before being wound into rolls.
So this is the video example for blown film extrusion.
At first glance, blown film extrusion seems to be very different from profile extrusion and co-extrusion. However, the process is essentially the same. After heating, the molten plastic is forced through a ring-shaped die, forming a tube. Air is also forced through the die into the tube, and a bubble is formed whose sides travel upward. This piece of equipment, which is producing plastic bags, carries the plastic up several stories before folding it over and bringing it down. As the tube descends, it is sealed and slit lengthwise from top to bottom, forming two tubes of a smaller diameter. When the material reaches the base of the extruder, the bags are simultaneously sealed and perforated horizontally, wrapped on a spool, and packaged.
Then I will pass the next slide to Iman Christina.
Okay, thank you, Karina. So the control parameters for blown film extrusion is the ratio of the length or diameter is 21 to 1 to 28 to 1. The smooth bore extruders is 24 to 1 to 30 to 1. The blown film line die gap is approximately around 1 millimeter to 1.5 millimeter. The melting temperature is about 380 Fahrenheit to 430 Fahrenheit, which equivalent to 195 degrees Celsius to 220 degrees Celsius. The blowout ratio is 4 to 5. The stock height is approximately around 7 to 5 multiplied with die diameter. The repro resin may add is approximately around 30% to 50%, and the density range is about 0.93 to 0.96 gram over centimeter cube. And the safety procedure for this process is that guard auger and heating devices from contact, guard the nozzle where the end of the auger connects to the die, isolate any heating, cutting or sealing processes that follow extrusion. Don't forget to wear PPE to cover face, hands and body. Fix guards to prevent reaching into moving parts. Guards that open must be interlocked, and the interlock guards with two control channels to prevent hazardous movement. Never wear loose clothing or jewelry. Keep rollers open as far as possible and running as slowly as possible, as well as keep an emergency stop within reach of either hand. Clean plastic dust from surfaces where it lands, but blowing dust with compressed air is not acceptable. Reduce noise levels by isolating machines or enclosing it. Always wear hearing protection and keep the area around presses clear of slip and trip hazards. So I will pass the next slide to Amalia.
Thank you, Iman Christina. Okay, next is about the advantages and disadvantages of blown film extrusion. For the advantages, first, this process has a better balance of mechanical properties than cast or extruded films. Second, this process can produce a large film, two smaller thin film, or other shapes of film. Third, this process provides a low melting temperature. While for the disadvantages, first, this process provides an efficient cooling process. Second, this process is difficult to control the thickness of a blown film. Third, the air entrapment between the layers of the film and rollers is grave in film extrusion, which can be dangerous for manufacturing process. Next. Next is defects. There are three possible defects in this process. First, resin defect, which is blowholes formation on the product. Second is chatter in film or bubble. Third, gouge bend or humps in roll. And the example is like the figure provided. Next, I will pass to Karina.
Thank you, Amalia. So for the conclusion, blown film extrusion is the most common method of producing plastic films, particularly for packaging industry. From the flow process, there are a few parameters that need to be taken care of, as well as the safety procedure. Every manufacturing process has its pros and cons. Hence, one needs to decide the most suitable process that gives the greatest outcome for the product development. The cost and effect analysis for the blown film extrusion process reveals that, aside from technology, the production processes used at company level are the most important factors. And that's all from us. Thank you for listening.